Good morning, and thank you for joining this morning's annual health benefits webinar. Today's presenters are Bruce Mazzarelli from Hub International, Ward Bauman of Corporate Synergies, I got that right, and Lou Young of Witham, Smith & Brown. Lou will briefly cover some of the main items that jumped out at the group when reviewing this year's survey, which was previously distributed to dealer principals and general managers. The bulk of today's webinar will focus on topics that respondents said were most important to them, including creating a balanced benefits portfolio, latest benefits offerings, including financial wellness, the impact of wellness programs on plan costs, the role of technology, and who is the ideal fit for self-insurance. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping details. On the right-hand side of your screen is a control panel. Take particular note of the questions tab. During the call, all participants will be muted. If you have a question during the presentation, you can submit it in the questions tab, and we will address all the questions from the participants at the end of the webinar, and may even have a couple posed by the presenters to the attendees. So we'll see how that goes. Now let's turn things over to Lou to start things off. Lou?
Thanks, Brian. Good morning, everybody. As Brian mentioned, we'll go through the survey results quickly and then get into the topics that the respondents came up with for the survey. So again, a little bit of background. This is our 7th annual benefit survey. We had over 100 respondents this year, outstanding. More than half of the respondents this year had more than 3 or more plans, which is the first time I think we popped over that. So it's good to see that we're offering these options to our employees. And the high deductible health plans have popped up well over 50% in terms of what's being offered to the employees. And we see that over 30% responding have their employees choose this as the most popular plan. So these are trends we've seen over the years and that we continue to see going forward. One thing we saw, there were a couple things that were interesting this year, but there seemed to be a movement of carrier choices from Cigna and Oxford to Horizon. Horizon popped up over 50%. So there was some movement in the carrier choice category. And again, we talked about this before. These have been bouncing around a little bit, but you can see that the HDHP plan utilization is at 30%, which I mentioned. And while it's bounced around, looking at the data, we do see some trends in this area with this growing as a percentage each year. As far as copays, we've been looking at the physician copays, and you can see gradually the 30 or less copays are dropping. Still a high percentage, but slowly the greater than $30 copays are increasing. And again, same for specialists. As far as copays are concerned, we're seeing the trend where greater than $50 has been increasing over time, shifting from below 50. So again, this is just some trends that we are seeing with the data that we're collecting. Prescriptions also, copays with deductions, copays only. We're seeing the numbers pretty much level at this point, but the copays only are at 50%. So again, this has been steady over time. We haven't seen many changes in the prescription programs. And again, here's one where we've talked about a few times. Out of pocket in network seems to be jumping around here, but generally we're seeing the trend for an increase. We saw an increase in 2020. It's in that 20% range. So this is one of the areas where we do keep an eye on what's going on. It's important, and it's also important to make sure that the employers are covering some of these out-of-pocket expenses as well, especially for the high deductible plans. Bruce or Ward, did you see anything in this area that you wanted to comment on, or any surprises in the results this year that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I'll go ahead and address the 5,000 plus category. I think Ward has some thoughts in regards to the below 5,000, because those are the two areas, right, where we can see an increase, which is kind of a dichotomy. I think on the top end, in terms of the 5,000 plus out-of-pocket maximum, we are seeing carriers continually shift up their maximum out-of-pockets. So you could very well, in the small group marketplace in particularly, have a plan that had 5,000 maximum out-of-pocket. When it renews, they made the decision to raise that to $6,000, for an example. And I think the other piece of that to just be aware of is that when we're looking at our plan designs, pay close attention to that maximum out-of-pocket, because today the allowable maximum, I believe, is $8,350 in terms of maximum out-of-pocket expenses. So there are products out there where, God forbid, one of your employees are hospitalized, that they literally would be responsible for $8,350 out of pocket. Pretty significant hit for anyone.
To follow up on that, Bruce, a couple of things come to my mind on this. One is employers are becoming more sensitive to the maximum out of pocket, so there's more of a demand from the employers for the carriers to offer a product that has a lower max out of pocket. But also, the other area is we're starting to see these value-based healthcare plans like Omnia through Horizon, which is the largest provider for the membership. And in these tiered approaches, the tier 1 benefits do have a much lower max out of pocket than on the tier 2. So I think that might be reflected in some of this information we're getting.
Okay, so one other question we've been asking now for the last 5 years is the ancillary benefit offerings. And there's two things that jump out at me here. One that we've seen, as you can see here, the offerings have been relatively stable over years. So dental, life, worksite benefits that are being offered has remained relatively stable. And the second thing is we did see an increase in the employer paid life insurance. So we saw a little bit of a jump for 2020. That's good to see that the employer is stepping up with the contributions for that benefit. As far as renewals are concerned, we see here that the renewals over 5% have jumped up. You can see in blue for 2020, there were more renewals above 5% than there were in previous years. Last year in particular, we saw renewals below 5% for the most part. That's something, I mean, it's still single digits. We're not seeing that many more above 10%, but they're out there, as you can see. But generally, the renewals this year were in the single digit area. And this is the slide that we like to look at and discuss every year. What are the renewal strategies? What are the strategies that people are using to keep these increases under control, to keep the premium costs under control? And while it's up slightly, the employee contribution has been one strategy to keep these under control. As you can see, it's been relatively steady at around 50% for the last few years. So that's good to see that it's remaining relatively constant, which means that the employer is either sharing in or picking up a greater percentage of the increases to or for the program. And again, as we've talked about many times, these premiums and healthcare costs are very important as far as the employees are concerned. Any business wants to stay competitive in terms of the healthcare programs that are being offered. They want to stay competitive as far as what the employee contributions are, and they also realize that this is a hefty expense on their P&L, and they want to make sure that they're getting the best bang for the buck, so to speak. So it's important that all businesses, dealerships, and any businesses keep their eye on healthcare costs for their programs. And again, as I mentioned, we saw some increases. The average increases hit pretty hard, pretty much for family. For the other tiers, the other groups, they were not as significant. Single has been the steady, slow increase, as well as parent-child. Couple premiums went up, and again, family has probably been the biggest mover in the past few years. And again, this is the table that we referred to before. You can see that employer cost sharing is going up, especially for that family tier. And I guess this is a way to keep costs in line for the employees. As we've all talked about, it's good to see employers trying to keep the premium costs competitive for the employees. Employee monthly share, again, it's been relative. You can see it's relatively steady, except for that family share. Even though we see the employer contribution going up, we also see the employee cost sharing going up slightly in 2020, where in the other categories, it's relatively stable, if not down over time. What we like to do as part of this survey report is look at what some of the marketplace comparisons are. And what we saw from the Kaiser family, which is the foundation that we typically look to for 2020, the average premium cost rose about 4%. One thing that we did see that they put out was a comparison to earnings and inflation. As you can see, the 4% was in line pretty much with workers' earnings increase, slightly above inflation. But the interesting thing here is looking at it over time, you see that the increase since 2010 for the average family premium increased by 55%, which is nearly twice as much as the increase in wages, and 3 times as much for as the increase for inflation. So this is a pretty stark comparison, looking at the premium cost increases over time. And I'll summarize things quickly here. As we've been talking about, we see the employer contributions pretty much remaining steady, but still at that above 50% level. Generally, we continue to see employers splitting the cost in order to buffer any increases to the employees. And again, this is a very important aspect for businesses. We continue to do this survey. We like to put the results out because we're starting to see some very important trends here. We like the data over time, so I think it's very useful, and hopefully everybody is getting the same benefit, so to speak, out of these survey results. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Bruce, at this point, and we'll cover some of the topics that you brought up in your survey results.
Thank you, Lou. So we're going to go ahead and spend the next couple of minutes talking about a balanced benefits portfolio. And I think that if we were in a live setting, I would pose the question to the group and say, well, what do you think a balanced portfolio of benefits really means? I think there's a couple of ways folks might answer that. One of the responses might be, we offer a lot of different products. We offer everything, soup to nuts in terms of our employees and allowing them to make elections. And that in part might be true. However, I think when we're thinking about a balanced benefits portfolio, what we would like to think about is offering a large portfolio of products, but the right products and those products that are in demand from our employees. And so when we think about a balanced benefits portfolio, we can think about medical quickly. Lou had mentioned earlier that the typical dealership is offering 3 different plans for their employees. The reason generally we do that is we recognize that the needs of our employees are different. One thing I would suggest with respect to that is to also not only just take a look at offering 3 plans, but understand the participation in those plans. It's not uncommon for me to work with a client or a prospect who has 3 plans, but one of the plans has 3 employees in it. That's probably not the right plan, perhaps not a balanced portfolio. So our perspective in terms of a balanced benefits portfolio is really understanding the needs of our employees. And certainly, and the statistics will back this up, that many more young people are entering the workforce. And so when we take a look at our census of employees that we employ today, we certainly are going to see a lot of young folks. We're going to see some folks in the middle, and we're going to see some older participants. Those needs of those individuals can be starkly different. It could be different even in terms of how we communicate to them. Do we work with paper? Do we use something electronically? Do we begin to text our employees in regards to their benefits programs? That's all information that would be helpful to understand in terms of what your population looks like and what their needs are. We do a program, or we have a program called Persona Analysis, and it's really a detailed study of your workforce. And there are other platforms out there that might be able to do the same thing. But what comes back as a result of this is really a detailed study of the number of employees that are in the youngest category versus the baby boomers. Also understanding what compensation is and those folks that might be struggling in terms of paying rent or putting food on the table. And that will allow you to put together a more detailed and appropriate benefits portfolio. So when we think about this, we try to go beyond the medical, dental, and life insurance. As Lou mentioned, with life insurance, we are seeing an uptick of employer-provided life insurance, but that's generally going to be specific to the individual employee. That same carrier you're getting that benefit from probably also can offer supplemental life insurance, which means your employees can buy up to a greater amount of insurance. They generally will also offer spousal and dependent care. Now, why might you consider this? Because in a group program, the life insurance benefits are going to be less expensive. There's generally a guaranteed issue, meaning that the employees, regardless of past medical history, can get up to, let's say, $100,000, $150,000 of coverage that might not be available to them in the marketplace. So in terms of life insurance, there's many more products out there. And again, if we go back to the demographics of your group, might not be as important to the 26-year-old single person relative to the 55-year-old person with a family, right? Life insurance generally is going to be more important for that latter category. So that's what we're hoping that our groups will start to think about, which is that balanced benefits portfolio hitting each of the different demographic categories, that represent our employees. Disability, another example of one that probably is not as important to the 26-year-old as the 55-year-old. And in the state of New Jersey, we're kind of fortunate in the sense that we do have a temporary disability program that's a requirement through the state, and it's actually a fairly rich benefit. 85% up to $850 a week in terms of that disability benefit, far exceeds what we see across the country. New York, who is one of the states that has the program, the maximum benefit is about $200. So short-term disability, I think the state program does a reasonable job. But what we don't see is long-term disability. So what about that individual who is unable to work for a period of 6 months or greater, in some instances 3 months or greater, depending upon the policy? Well, there are programs that I think your employees would find valuable around long-term disability to provide that peace of mind that while it's not life insurance as a result of passing away, it does give me money that allows me to continue to live, although I'm unable to work at the time. The next consideration is worksite benefits. So worksite benefits, if you think about American Fidelity, if you think about Aflac, those are carriers that provide programs such as accident coverage, critical illness. Those types of benefits tend to be very well received by employees, but also recognize those carriers probably have 12 to 15 different programs that are worth taking a look at. And again, with the goal of kind of pinpointing what's important to folks in terms of the benefits that are being offered by their employer. Because just like Lou mentioned about the competitiveness of the program, the programs that you're offering beyond the medical, the dental, the life insurance program can have some stickiness for employees and does help with retention. So we spent some time talking about those products that might be important for the older folks, but probably one of the fastest growing categories, and this tends to be very well received for the younger employees in particular, is pet insurance. So pet insurance is a program that's out there. I think if any of us are on social media, you can see how important pets are, particularly since we're probably spending a lot of time with them. I know in my case, with my two dogs, I certainly am. And so pet insurance is a cost-effective way to help cover those expenses of those pets. And again, it's a benefit that probably has a greater impact to your younger employees, but it's feeding into that balanced benefits portfolio. The other area that we think is definitely important, and it tends to be again for the younger folks, is the financial products. So we understand HSAs for the most part, right? A health savings account. If you have a high deductible health plan, employees can put money aside on a pre-tax basis. And that's a benefit that plays pretty well across the demographics. FSAs, again, opportunity to put money on a pre-tax basis to pay out-of-pocket expenses. Even if you don't have a high deductible plan where you can have an HSA, you would have availability of an FSA, a flexible spending account that can help offset expenses. There are also dependent care accounts. There are programs in regards to transit. So an FSA is a program, again, that we think really fits nicely into a balanced benefits portfolio. To dig a little deeper into the financial products today, where we are seeing a significant uptick in interest is around college debt. And so there are vendors out there that would come on site and speak to your employees. And one of the big advantages is that they offer loan consolidation programs. So you might have an employee who has a significant college debt. It may be at 7 or 8%. These vendors are able to come on site, speak to your employees, apply, and they may be able to reduce the terms and certainly reduce the interest rate that somebody is responsible for paying. So we're seeing quite a bit of interest in regards to college loan refinance. In addition to that, and frankly, this is probably at the larger group level today in terms of what we're seeing in the marketplace, would be assistance in paying down that loan in terms of college debt. So there are employers now that are making considerations about, rather than putting X dollars into an employee's 401k, giving them the option to put that money directly towards paying down their college debt. And that's a little bit deeper topic. I think Ward has made the point in the last presentation that each one of these topics are probably a couple hours or half a day. That's one that would certainly take some additional conversation, and we'd be happy to speak to you about it. So the question becomes, why do we want to think about expanding the portfolio? The first thing I would caution is if we do think about expanding the portfolio is to do it wisely, to make sure we're meeting the needs of our diverse individuals that work for us. And there are tools out there that are available. We can run a persona analysis and really understand your population and what types of products are really needed and what types of products, if you offer them, will be well received. And then the other side of this, the advantage to your employees is that there's group pricing. I mentioned this on the life insurance. You can get guaranteed issue and group pricing on life insurance, so it's going to be very, very competitive and easy to apply. From an employer's perspective, most of the benefits we're speaking about here are employee paid. So there's not an additional cost, and there's limited admin in the sense that many of the same carriers have the ability to offer supplemental life as family life, work site benefits can often be the same carrier. So you're not going to add a lot of administrative burden in regards to expanding your portfolio. So there's a lot of options, a lot of opportunities. And, again, I do think that if we start thinking about the fact that our populations are changing, we want to make sure our benefits portfolio is changing along with them. Did anyone have any specific comments or questions in regards to perceptions around a balanced benefits portfolio?
We want to give people a chance to do that. If you want to keep going, I'll interrupt if we get any questions coming in.
Fair enough.
Give you a little time.
Very good. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Ward to talk about our next topic.
Thank you, Bruce. I appreciate that. As I was listening to this, your presentation, it just occurred to me that the participants of the survey were really wise, because actually all four of these topics flow together really nicely. And particularly technology is a great follow-up to a balanced portfolio for a lot of reasons. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the technology advancements and what's available today and how the impact is for the employers and also for our employees. But to start off with, as a great follow-up, I'm going to jump around these bullets a little bit. First, go over communication strategies and benefits administration. The communication strategy, they both work together. Today, previously, large employers, you had to be large to be able to implement a benefits administration system. And those of you that are not familiar with the Ben Admin system, essentially what it does is it allows your employees to handle their health insurance elections electronically as opposed to the old-fashioned paper. And it actually helps the staff, because now the staff doesn't have to hand out communications, collect them, create spreadsheets, pass it on to the carrier or your broker. And so the benefits administration system not only assists during the open enrollment process, it opens a portal and allows employees to make elections, but it also allows them during the year to access information. And if you have a new hire, it has the ability to onboard them electronically into the benefits plan. Historically, these plans were only for employers that had more than 100 enrolled, but now these plans go down to much smaller groups. You can get a very good benefits administration plan even if you're under 50 enrolled employees today. And so when you create this balanced portfolio, as Bruce just went over, the first thing that might be going through your head is the headaches on adding more products, more plans, getting, our staffs are already burdened with so much work to do that to bring on more programs is just going to just create too much of a burden. Well, with this access to technology, it relieves that burden on the staff quite a bit. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the data analytics. And it was really interesting. Right before the seminar today at 9:30, I received another email from Aetna. And the heading of it was Transforming Care Through Data, Leveraging Data Analytics to Help Your Population Make Better Health Decisions and lower overall health care costs. And this is what we're sort of talking about here. These ideas we're talking about are trying to reduce costs, not increase costs to administer and to handle your health care. And with that data analytics, more and more data is becoming available. It's been available for groups over 100, except now the information we're able to get is more relevant on trying to make, instead of giving it informational, it's now giving us information that we can now make decisions to help reduce healthcare spend. And I'll give you one example. You can look at mammographies, for example, for women. And historically, it would just say, how many mammographies ran through the plan? Well, more of the analytics is where you determine how many women are eligible for mammographies and how many receive them. So now we know where the gap is and how many of our membership is going to get their primary care visits. So we're really getting data that now we can take this data and we can push out communications to encourage our employees and their dependents to seek care that otherwise they may not be getting, which ultimately is going to have a positive effect long-term on reducing our healthcare spend. The one thing I wanted to go over on the consumer side or the employee side is we're all aware that we now have the Fitbits, and it's giving us instant data on heart rate and how many steps a day we're taking. And then there's mobile apps that can sync with a Fitbit that gives us really very relevant information. But also some of the new technology that's coming out is where people can wear a device who are diabetic, and they'll monitor the blood level, and they'll push out information through your portable or through your app, through your mobile device, on when there's a condition that you're not aware of. So it eliminates this having to test your blood. And these are technologies that are coming out. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about today, but certainly not the last technology, is telemedicine. Telemedicine has had a huge impact on our lives, particularly in the last year. It was about 2 or 3 years ago when telemedicine first became prevalent. The carriers started to add it to their plans. I was very skeptical. I said, this is never going to work. People are not going to want to call a doctor or do a FaceTime with a doctor. They're going to want face-to-face. And boy, the pandemic really changed our world. And what it did was it really opened up our eyes and my eyes to the need for people to have access to physicians other than going into an office. And it's been a boom for telemedicine, the pandemic. And I'm sure all of you, or maybe not, but a lot of us have experienced firsthand what it's like. I know I had a appointment, I had a growth. It was on my ear and I didn't know what it was. And to try and get in to see the doctor, it takes time to get an appointment. So I called the office and I arranged to have a televisit with my dermatologist. And I was able to FaceTime him and I showed him on the screen, and he right away said, that's something I should have looked at and have removed. And I did. And it was a good thing I did. So these are areas now that are going to change our lives for the better. It's going to also reduce the time for an employee to perhaps during their free time or away from work, when instead of having to go to a doctor's office, drive there, wait in the waiting room, wait in the examining room, finally see the doctor for 5 minutes, then have to leave, check out, leave, go drive home. This is a minimum of an hour, where literally this televisit can be 10 minutes. So it's a huge time saver. It's a time saver for the doctor, for their staff, and for the members. So essentially, what we're moving towards is that this whole role of technology is being referred to as the fourth industrial revolution. And it's exciting times, and I think we haven't even begun to see what the capabilities are and how it's going to benefit not only our most valuable resource, our employees, but also our lives as employers. So with that, I want to pass this back to Bruce.
Thank you, Ward. And I will say it was very perceptive to point out the fact of how these topics kind of interact with one another. You mentioned data analytics, and that's something that's extremely important for a self-insured group, because we want to be able to review the data and then take action based on the results of that data. And that's particularly important in a self-insured program where someone is responsible for paying the claims up to a level of stop loss. And so we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about what is self-insurance, More so, we just want to talk about who do we think is the ideal fit for a self-insured program. I think it starts by someone understanding, a client as well as the broker, understanding why self-insurance? What are the potential advantages? Well, first off, there's control. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it is your program. You're not necessarily replacing the insurance company, but you have a lot of control in regards to the design of the program, the benefits that are being offered, how they're paid, etc. In general, you would generally see a long-term savings in a self-insured program. Now, I would caveat that and say we're probably talking about 100, 150 plus in a self-insured program, where over time you'd expect to see 6 to 8 to 10% savings, because on the self-insured program, your fixed costs are generally going to be less than what they are going to be in the fully insured environment. So, control, long-term savings, flexibility. I spoke on the last seminar, and I'll repeat it, that with respect to benefits, the carriers have some limitations based on how they filed the programs in a particular state. And I had a client who had a great idea. We both thought it was a great idea. We were seeing we had data, we were seeing significant emergency room utilization. And the thought process was, with all these urgent care facilities being built and recognizing the cost of a claim is probably about, on average, 70 to 80% less, we want to steer folks to the urgent care facility. So the thought process was, let's raise the emergency room copay to $500. Makes perfect sense intuitively. Someone who has a true emergency is going to have it taken care of. They'd be willing in that situation to pay the $500. But a lot of folks who might not really need the emergency room will go to an urgent care center and have a much lower cost claim. So there's flexibility in a self-insured program. In that case, it was a fully insured program, and the carrier told us, no, our ability is only to go up to $200. That's the maximum you can have. That really is not enough of an incentive to steer folks to the urgent care facility the way the $500 would have. So in a self-insured program, you have the flexibility to then offer that $500 copay as an example. And then, of course, access to data, right? We just spoke about data analytics, but very often in a fully insured program, we're not seeing any data, and we really don't know what the basis for a large renewal increase is. A lot of times it's theoretical. Well, the group's running high. We have a couple of high claimants. Well, show me. In a self-insured program, you'll have access to the data to be able to see that. In terms of group size, today there's a category of products called level funded, and that's kind of like a hybrid between self-insurance and fully insured business. We see carriers offering that program. Cigna and Oxford would be examples, Aetna as well, who will even go a little bit below 25. But on a level funded self-insured program, you can see that for 25 plus enrolled employees, and it could be an effective strategy. Often we see it as a transition to a traditional self-insured program, though. So you might say, I'm interested in self-insurance, but I'm not ready to take on the risk. A level funded program will cap your risk. You'll know exactly what it is from a budgetary perspective. And if you run better, you'll get a refund in terms of those claims. So it is a natural transition for someone who may not be ready for a true self-insured ASO program. And again, goes down to 25 lives. More traditional self-insurance we see as the ideal fit being 100 plus, in part because you probably have claims that we can bring in to analyze to make sure that all the programs are priced appropriately. So we see that as 100 plus generally being the best fit. And again, the size where you're going to see those long-term savings. You may have fewer than that employees. So between 25 and 100, you could be in level funded. But there are also programs called captives. I would think most folks are familiar with captives for other programs, perhaps not for health insurance, but they exist here as well. And again, as I mentioned earlier, these topics could be half-day topics as opposed to just 10 minutes. So if you have any interest, you can reach out to us and we can speak to you a little bit further in regards to a captive. The other point I would make about the 100 plus group is really, where do we go in terms of getting a self-insured program? There are options. There are carriers such as Aetna, Cigna, even Horizon, Blue Cross Blue Shield, UMR, which is a United company affiliated with Oxford. We can go to the carrier to get these self-insured programs, and they'll look pretty similar to a fully insured program from a member's perspective, from the doctor's perspective. But then there also are a very large number of what's called a third-party administrator. So that's an organization that's operating kind of like an insurance company in a sense that they do the back office work. They will process the claims. They may kind of plug and play in terms of different programs around medical management, claims utilization. So a third-party administrator, which generally can be a little bit less expensive than the carrier as an administrator, what we want to think about, though, or be sure of, is if we're using a third-party administrator, we want to make sure that we're getting the best possible discounts on the claims, right? If the fixed costs are 20%, 80% is the claims cost, that's the big bucket of money. We want to make sure we're getting the best discounts. Generally, what you will find is by going through the carrier, you will actually get the best possible level of discounts. Cigna would be an example. Almost any third-party administrator out there has access to Cigna's network. So even though Cigna's not processing the claims, your employees are utilizing Cigna's network. The problem in that scenario is that you're not getting the best possible Cigna discounts. The same would be true in terms of United. UMR gets the best possible discounts. And by the way, they don't make United's network available with third-party administrators. So again, just some thought or some things to think about in regards to, what's the appropriate way to take a look at self-insurance. Who's the fit? Someone who's willing to take on some risk, right? Claims are going to vary from month to month. We may get hit with a large claimant, and we might have a significant, outlay of cash. Now, that risk corridor, because of stop-loss insurance, is generally limited to about 25% of claims. So there are protections in this plan. It's not that, we're going to, have an unexpected number of claims or an insurmountable number of claims, recognizing, so long as you recognize going in, that you have that 25% corridor. By the way, you could spend 25% less than the expected claims as well. So again, there are advantages of self-insurance. You have to accept the budget fluctuations. You want to see data, right? You have to have a willingness to take a look at the data and take action based on that data. And perhaps you need more plan flexibility, which certainly is provided in a self-insured program. So again, while this is a topic that is certainly much broader and longer than a 10-minute presentation, folks were interested in trying to understand what's the best fit for self-insurance. And hopefully you kind of take away the key points that we made here today in understanding if you might be a fit. Certainly we're available to assist or speak to your current broker to see if self-insurance is in fact a fit for you. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation back over to Ward. We're playing a little ping pong here today. But again, he made the point earlier, and I'll reiterate it. These concepts all play together because in a real comprehensive program, each 4 of these categories are going to be addressed. Ward?
Thank you, Bruce. So I'm going to spend the last few minutes on wellness. And this was a topic that was also that we discussed last year at this webinar. We spent a lot of time discussing the differences between the crawl, walk, run approach. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the crawl, walk, but I am going to focus more on the run today. But essentially, the crawl was the early stages of wellness when carriers would offer gym reimbursements and some various incentives, newsletters, so very, very passive, just starting to introduce the staff to thinking about their well-being. And then walking was the next step where employers started taking a little more of an active role, where they started encouraging smoking cessation it could be either by encouraging it or the stick approach by penalizing someone who continues to smoke, and then creating some incentives for people who are taking on certain wellness activities like walking challenges, and bringing in perhaps some opportunity through the carriers typically where they could have access to some coaches. So then we get into the run, and the run is on the next slide. Lou, please. Oh, thank you. So before I go into the run, I wanted to throw this out there. When did it become the employer's responsibility to provide wellness to the staff? That is a question that, I think every employer is scratching their heads. It's bad enough that you have to provide benefits, which are the second highest cost next to payroll, but now it becomes your responsibility to keep your employees healthy. and why is it your responsibility? And that's what you're paying an insurance carrier for. Well, I want to mention a couple statistics here, and then we'll get into why it makes sense on why employers should take some interest in this. First thing is, out of every dollar that goes to your health insurance costs, your premiums, 95 cents on those dollars goes to treating conditions, and only 5 cents goes to preventive care. So the carriers are spending most of those dollars that are coming in to them in the form of premiums are going out in the form of paying claims. The other thing I want to mention is another statistic, is that 39.3% of all the claims that are paid on average are for chronic conditions. Now, we also know that your premiums are based on your claims and your utilization. So it became indirectly our responsibility to let's figure out a way to reduce our premiums. Well, the way to reduce premiums, you can't just keep jumping around carrier to carrier to save money. I mean, you can, but eventually you're going to run out of carriers. What we need to do is get some control over our healthcare spend. And the way we get control is we try to engage employees in some wellness activities. And a couple things I wanted to mention on that here is what's going on here is if we get the employees engaged and we can help reduce costs, as I mentioned before, it's going to have a trickle-down effect to help reduce our premiums and then ultimately reduce our employees' contributions, and it's a great snowball in the positive direction. With the other things we talked about previously, with a balanced portfolio and with technology and self-funding, it now really becomes much more important to try to do everything we can to reduce healthcare costs. The one area I wanted to talk about is what can we do? What can we do to reduce the spend through a wellness program? There's a lot of vendors out there that now we can engage that will help us build programs to engage employees in wellness activities. There are tracking tools and reporting challenges and reporting and challenges. And the one step, which I think we're going to see in the next several years, is going to be full biometrics. And this is something that employers up until now have been very resistant to. They've been resistant to, years ago, I remember presenting just a simple health risk assessment where the carrier wanted all the employees to complete a health risk assessment so we could determine, so the carrier could determine where the risks lie. And what we're trying to do is, if you break out employees' a continuum on where they are in health and wellness, is you have low risk, moderate risk, high risk. The high risk, as we talked about, are the ones that are generating almost 40% of our claim dollars. What we're trying to do through a wellness program is prevent the people who are moderate risk from becoming a high risk and trying to move some of the high risk down to moderate. So if we can identify somebody who is pre-diabetic and prevent them from becoming diabetic, it's going to have a huge long-term effect on the plan. And this is where the health risk assessments was the beginning, was sticking our toe in the water. Biometrics is where we're now jumping into the deep end. And with full biometrics, which is coming, it's going to have the ability to employees are going to have to take a blood test. And it's going to be a finger prick, or if they work remotely, they can go to a lab and have the blood drawn. Now, you're not going to have access to every employee's or any of your employees' specific results. What you will get is a report that is going to give us a finding on what the health conditions are, and then through using technology and communications, we can then try to drive behavior and build incentives for employees to take action to keep them from becoming a high risk or moving them down off the continuum. The impact and the ROI on doing this, well, the impact for the employer is, of course, it's going to be lower healthcare costs. As a matter of fact, we're starting to see results, and we're seeing results as much as for every dollar that an employer invests in these wellness activities, we're seeing almost a $4 return on that investment. So it's something that if you buy into the fact that, well, if I'm responsible to help pay my premiums for my health care costs, and costs keep going up, and if I want to reduce costs, then I need to maybe make an investment into some wellness activities to help reduce my healthcare spend. The employee's impact is, unfortunately, there's a lot of mistrust. And employees think that there's Big Brother, and as they start giving information to a vendor, to a third party, that this can be used against them. And somehow we need to continue to drive, particularly under the HIPAA laws, which have been in place for quite a while, that this information is protected, and it can't be used against an employee. It can't be used by any outside vendor. This information is specifically for the healthcare plan to make decisions on how it can reduce healthcare costs. And the return on and one thing I want to go before I move on to the ROI, but the one thing about the employees, where I'm finding success with some of my clients and some car dealers, is when we create this wellness program, we have a committee. It's not just the employer and the HR manager or the office manager or the general manager. We now have a committee. We have somebody who's coming from sales, and someone who's coming from maintenance, and someone who's coming from the shop, and having everybody involved in this. And it's not necessarily the department heads. So when we sit down and we go over the data, and they understand what they're doing, what we're trying to accomplish, these employees go back and they become the champions. And they talk the program up, and they try to help the employees who are nervous about Big Brother to understand that this is going to have a long-term positive effect on what they're going to be contributing for health insurance, and that this is good for not just the dealer, not just the owner, but also for every member who's insured under the program. And then, as we talked about some ROI, but the one last piece of ROI I wanted to talk about was the ROI on absenteeism and presenteeism. And that's another important factor, that if we can get control and help employees stay healthy, then we're going to have two things. One, absenteeism. If they're not running to the doctor because they're sick, well, that's good, because they're there and they're doing their job, which we all need them to do. And then presenteeism, some of you maybe have heard of this, but this is where an employee is on the job, but they're not focused because they're worried about the health of themselves or somebody else in their family, and they're not really focused on doing their job, and this is where mistakes can happen. So if we can really get engagement and get employees to buy into the fact that we're trying to improve their lives, and it's not all about, and it's not at all about Big Brother. I think we can see, and we have been seeing, some great success in developing and presenting wellness plans to employers. I welcome anybody here who would like to get more information on this to contact Bruce or myself, or of course, reach out to your brokers. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to, I think Lou is going to do some closing, or Bruce.
That would be Lou.
Okay, great. Thanks, A lot of useful information today. As I mentioned before, our goal is very simple. We're trying to provide some key information to help the dealers make these balanced decisions regarding health benefit programs. And again, we moved through the results pretty quickly today, but I recommend everybody read the report. If you have any questions, you can reach out to any of us. We're pretty excited. We've been doing this for 7 years. We've got some pretty useful data at this point. We're starting to see some trends that we can really use. And these roundtables are very important to us because we need to get your feedback. We like the fact that it can be interactive, and our surveys have gone that route in recent years. We want the feedback from our participants. We want to hear what they're interested in, and we want to move our discussions to those topics that you choose, that you want to hear about. So again, this has evolved, and I think it's a pretty good forum at this point. And of course, the most important thing is to get back to the point where we can do these live, get everybody in the room. The last time we did a live one, we had a fabulous discussion. People were asking great questions, making comments. It was thought-provoking for everyone, including Bruce and Ward. So that's key. We want to get back, and we hope that we can do that as soon as possible. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions, Brian, if we have them.
It looks like Bruce and Ward and you have covered everything because we don't have any questions.
Okay, great.
As you can see on the slide here, obviously, if anybody has any questions afterwards, you can contact any Lou, Ward, or Bruce. We are going to be posting a recording of this webinar along with the slides and a copy of the report. Actually, our Tuesday webinar is already up on the website. We'll be adding this one to that posting on the public side of the NJCAR website. So I guess that is, I'd just like to thank Bruce, Ward, and Lou again, and thank you to our participants. And I guess, unless you guys have anything else, that concludes today's webinar.
Okay, great.
Thank you,
very
everyone.
much.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.